Hello, I'm Daniel Estrada, and this is Engineering Ethics at NJIT. It is April 24th, and we're in Lesson 14, Week 14. This is the last full week of assignments for this course. We're almost done with the semester. Let's jump into the lesson. Alright, so we are talking about technological unemployment. For the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about artificial intelligence and various ethical issues related to artificial intelligence. Mostly about, last week we were talking about in warfare and in weapon systems, automation, and so on. This week we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and its impact on the economy when robots take our jobs. So I have a lot of material here for you to look over. This is a normal week's assignment where you do a normal post and have to do 2 replies, and there's a quiz. The quiz is mostly drawn from this short 15-minute documentary, Humans Need Not Apply, and from the Frey and Osborne article, which I'll talk about in a second. The Humans Need Not Apply is the easiest way to get into this week's material. This is about, it gives you sort of history of technological unemployment and robotics in the workplace. It talks about this robot, Baxter. Baxter's a robot that's designed to work. We've had industrial robots for a long time, but Baxter's designed to work in human spaces, to be easy to program for humans that don't know how to code. So you can grab Baxter's arms and sort of move it around and tell it what to do, and then it'll remember that sequence, and then it'll repeat that sequence as often as you like. So Baxter's supposed to be a human-compatible work robot, a general-purpose computer, general-purpose laborer. And this is threatening to the way that we structure our economy today. So for one brief example of this, we might look at this map. So this is a map of the most common job in every state from 1978 to 2014. So this isn't all the way to the present, but this is the last 30 years of the economy. And you can see over these 30 years how the job market has changed, what jobs are available. So back in 1978, there were a lot of farmers, there were a lot of secretaries, there were a lot of machine operators. This was back when America still made things, you know, in the machine belt and the rust belt here, when we still had large farming populations, when we still needed secretarial work because computers weren't common enough that people could do their own word processing. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the future and let's see how this changes. Let me go back. New Jersey, most common job in 1978 is machine operator. Okay, so let's go forward in time, and what you're going to see is that the secretarial jobs start going away, the farming jobs start going away, and the industrial jobs start going away. Here's 1988 is like height of secretary, and they start to be replaced by truck driving jobs. So for most of the 90s here, truck driving is one of the most common jobs in most of the states. Here in 1996, quite a bit of the Mid-East to the South. Truck driving is the most common job. It means more people are employed as truck drivers than any other single occupation. You can see the farming jobs are whittling away even in the Midwest. All of the industrial jobs going away. Computer analyst starts to show up in places like Colorado, Arizona, and Alaska still need their secretaries, I guess. All right, let me zoom in here to present day. Okay, so this is 2014, as recent as these figures have. Notice that New Jersey secretary is still the most common job, 2014, but quite a big chunk of this map is taken up by truck driving, some software developing, lots of customer service, but lots of truck drivers. And clearly this is going to change very soon. So within just the last few months, at the end of last year, before Uber's world started collapsing, one of their stunts was to put a bunch of self-driving Uber cars on the road, and also to put these self-driving trucks on the road, and they made one of the first commercial deliveries with these self-driving trucks. So the technology is almost there. These things are really expensive, and you still need to have a person in the truck to take over the vehicle in case anything goes wrong. The person needs to be in the truck in case anything goes wrong. Also, when they're driving off of the highways, so if you're in non-highway roads, then you're going to need a person in charge, actually steering the wheel. But for these long-haul commutes, and we use truck driving quite a lot. It's not only a very important job, but it's also very important for the entire economy. And these are jobs that are going to be turned over to robots very soon. Robots are going to start doing this kind of work. Now, maybe Uber isn't going to lead this this drive. Uber's having a lot of other kinds of business difficulties right now. And feel free to talk about these in the comments. I had a list of links a few weeks ago to other Uber issues. Business issues with Uber, ethical issues with Uber. But other companies are bringing these trucks up to the road, and it's clearly going to have a big impact on the economy. And it's not just truck drivers, although truck driving is a good example of the kinds of jobs that end up being automated. These are jobs that are fairly low skill, low education requirements. They're also fairly low paid. Truck driving is better paid than other jobs that require similar education and training. There's some training that's required for truck driving. You need to get your license. There may be some upfront costs if you need to buy your own truck. These costs are relatively low, and people can enter the truck driving industry fairly easily. And so these are millions of jobs that are under threat. These kinds of jobs that are easy to automate, that require fairly low-skill labor, are going to be the jobs that get taken up by these robots. But it's not just the truck driving jobs. So McDonald's has been increasingly automating its workforce. There's still burger flippers in the back, but your cashiers are no longer going to be human cashiers. They're not going to be these little kiosks that you can go and order your own food on a touchscreen, pay for it yourself, and then your food gets brought out to you. So there's still human workers in the back, but much fewer workers. We're used to these kinds of changes. We've seen them in grocery stores that let you check out your self-checkout grocery stores. In these cases, there's 6 or 7 registers, but there's one person sort of watching everyone use their own register. So a job that used to take 6 people is now being done by one person, right? So this is the trend of automation, that these jobs that used to take lots of people, lots of human labor, are now being done by automated machines. Here's another example. This is at a orchard. They have a little mobile kiosk. It's on wheels. It's a little robot, and you can walk up to it and ask it where your part is. It has a little camera on it, so you can show it that I'm looking for this nail or this fitting, and it can tell you it can recognize, using machine learning. It can recognize what you're holding, and then it guide you to it in the store. Right? These are jobs that used to be done by people, and they're still done by people, but these are lots and lots of jobs that are going to get taken up by robots. So one of the things that has been pushing this automation trend is the increasing demand for a higher minimum wage. Human labor is one of the highest expenses of most jobs, their workforce, and if the workers are demanding more money, then there's more pressure on the owners to automate, to replace those jobs with robots who don't require the same paycheck and are cheaper to operate. So a couple of years ago in 2014, California had a bill on the ballot for voters to vote for to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. $15 an hour gradually over the next, I think, 5 or 10 years, something like that. And this was a big fight in California. It was a lot of controversy, and some of the job owners took out billboards like this, meet your minimum wage replacement. Here's your iPad replacement. Right, this is actually the case, that people's jobs are being taken by these robots. So this pushes it into the political sector. And just to be clear about some of the facts here, some people might say, well, it's bad that these jobs are being taken by robots because someone might want that job. But these are not really, maybe you might think that these are not the most important jobs. That working at a fast food restaurant, that's a job that a kid has when they're in high school for spending money. That's not money that they need to survive. Right? That's not money that's keeping them alive or supporting a family. That's just money for them to go to the movies on weekends or whatever. I don't know what kids do anymore. But this stereotype is wrong. In fact, most people working minimum wage jobs are not high schoolers who live with their parents and are just earning spending money. The average the average minimum wage worker is 35 years old. I'm 35 years old. The average minimum wage worker, 88% of them are not in their teens. Most of them are 20 or older. The vast majority of them are 20 or older. 36% are 40 or older. More than half of them are women. Almost 30% of them have children. And more than half of them work full-time, either at one job or at multiple jobs. On average, they earn half of their family's total income. So these are the people who have these minimum wage jobs and these low-paying jobs are not just teenagers. They are people trying to support a family. And when these jobs get taken away, the means that these families have for supporting themselves also go away. So just some more facts and figures. A lot of the commentary and a lot of the media discussion of automation really was launched off by this paper, which I link to in the notes. This is the Frey and Osborne paper. Frey and Osborne, 2013, give an analysis of the U.S. labor market. And what they do is they look at a bunch of different, something like 700 different job categories, and they rate each of these job categories for how likely they are to be automated in the near future, I think over the next 15 years or so. They conclude that 47% of total U.S. employment is at risk. This is 47% of job categories, not 47% of jobs. Quite a large number of categories of jobs, the kinds of work that people are employed in today, are going away or becoming automated in the very near future. Let me go ahead and scroll down here and show you some of the charts from this. I encourage you to read it. A lot of the quiz questions from this week come from this document. There are some nice charts in here. Here. Okay, yeah, so this is the probability of computerization for all the different categories that they look at. This is how many people are employed in these categories and how likely it is to be computerized. So you can see over here are the ones that are very likely to be computerized. 47% of these have very high employment. These are the ones that are very unlikely to be categorized, and 33% of these have very high employment also. And then there's this big medium range where there's it's sort of not likely to be. Some of this is more likely to be computerized than others, but not a whole lot of people are employed in these categories. And these are the different categories here. So you see that office and administrative support is this big beige chunk right here, and that's very likely to be automated. Sales and sales-related industries, very likely to be automated. Service industries is all this pink blob right here, is very likely to be automated. Transportation and moving material is the brown up on top, and production. These are job categories that are likely to be automated. Here's how many people are employed in those categories. So quite a lot of automation happening. And in this article, at the very end of the article, they have a big table where they go through all the different job categories and give you their specific number that they're predicting for how likely it is to be automated. So occupational therapists have a very, very low chance of being automated. Choreographers, not looking for a whole lot of robot choreographers. Podiatrists, recreational workers. Curators, museum curators, athletic trainers. These are apparently not at high risk for automation. But as we sort of scroll down the list, we get more higher risk of automation. So here we're at like 25% chance of automation. Captains, mates, and pilots of water vessels. That's nice. Career technical education teachers and middle school teachers, likely to be automated. Gaming supervisors. Biological technicians. In fact, most technician work, most work where you're not the lead engineer, but you're the technical person doing technical work, those are the kinds of things that end up being automated. Funeral attendants. I'll let you go through this list on your own. 50% court reporters, the stenographers. These might be automated in the near future. And then we have the very high likelihood to be automated. Tire repairers and changers, dental hygienists, boilermakers, shampooers, apparently that's a job category, barbers. 80% of barbers are 80% likely to be automated. That's interesting. So you can check your own career path. There's also this BBC tool here where you can type in your job title, and it'll tell you your risk for automation. If you're a farmer, it's 76% likely to be automated. It's 108th most likely to be automated of the job categories considered. All these robots taking our jobs is going to have a large impact on the way that we structure and run our economy, right? The way that we manage our economy, right? The way that we work now requires people to work a job or maybe two jobs to make ends meet. If all of those jobs go to robots, if there's just not enough jobs to go around, this is going to have a big impact on the way that people live their lives. And this isn't the first time this has happened. In fact, this process of automation is characteristic of the industrial age as such. So from the very beginning of industrialization, right, when we started building the big factories and people started moving from the farms in the country into the cities, right, in the early 1800s, early 19th century. Right, so industrialization is characterized by automation. That you start to be able to automate first the production of energy and then the production of mechanical labor. And as this becomes more and more automated, the kinds of work that people do also changes. So we were working in the fields and now we're working in factories. And then we're not just working in factories, we're working on these assembly lines where we're just doing one little bit of the thing. And then we're not just working on the assembly line, but we're supervising a bunch of robots who are doing the assembly line, the assembly line work, and so on. And at each stage, you need less and less people to do this, to do even greater amounts of work. So this has required restructuring our economy several times. We now have a largely service, or we're at least moving towards a largely service-based economy, where we were for a long time, about 30 years ago. Up until about 30 years ago, we were an industrial economy where we actually produced things. And then if you go back before industrialization, we were a farming economy, right? So at each of these transitions require large-scale changes in the everyday life of everyday people. And there have been, for as long as this automation process has been happening, there have been resistance to this automation process. So you might have heard the term Luddite as someone who doesn't like technology. This comes from a group of workers who protested in the early industrial age for their factories being automated. So these were workers who were living in cities and working in these factories. In fact, they had migrated to the cities in order to work in these factories. But then as the technology started improving, these factories became more and more automated, and these jobs started going to these machines. And the Luddites were a group of people led by a guy named Ned Ludd. And they decided that the robots shouldn't have these jobs, that these jobs should go to people who have to feed their families, right, who need a way to live. And so these jobs belong to the people, they don't belong to the machines. And so what the Luddites would do is they would break into these factories and smash the machines with hammers and so on. They did this several times in the early 1800s, and it became a thing. And people started talking about Luddites as the people who were aggressively against the industrialization of the workforce, of the automation of the workforce. Right? They thought that they deserved those jobs. Just an interesting note, since we were talking about ethics and AI, it's because of the Luddites that we have some of the first legal protections for machines. In particular, the Frame Breaking Act is an act that considers the breaking of a machine, the destruction of a machine, the willful destruction of a machine, to be a capital crime punishable by death. So this is protection of the machine, not because it's a machine, but because it's a bit of capitalist infrastructure that's required to run the business. So the business is protected by these laws. Right? And so you have this tension here between the needs of capitalism to be efficient, to make as much money as possible, and the needs of the laborers, the workers, to support themselves, to make a living. So this is an old fight. This is a fight that we've had for literally hundreds of years. This isn't a product of the modern industrial age. This isn't a product of the new robots that we have working in the factories. This has been the pattern of industrialization for hundreds of years. So you see a lot of people who are sort of modern day Luddites who argue that automation is bad. We shouldn't let these robots take our jobs. Letting the robots drive our cars is a bad thing. And you might expect that maybe in the near future you have neo-Luddites who hack into these self-driving trucks and cause a big accident on the road in protest of these robots taking our jobs. Right? These are the kinds of things that have a long historical precedent, and we shouldn't be surprised to see them. This kind of stuff happen in the future. Not just for the robots taking our jobs, but just general ire to the robots sharing our public spaces. Robots driving alongside you in the roads. There have been talk of having a robot-only lane where the Tesla self-driving cars drive in a separate lane for robots so that they don't get in accidents with all the people. It's sort of separate but equal, has a long history, a long end, a long history that maybe we don't want to emulate. So there's this reactionary response to automation, thinking these robots are a bad thing. There's also the other response, and I just want to mention this really briefly. There's lots of things to talk about in the lesson. One thing that I'm not going to talk about here, I might talk about it in the Hangout, is this digital labor conference, where they go over some of the challenges of the new sort of sharing economy, Uber and Airbnb, and the ways that we're sort of trying to reorganize our resources, our economic resources, to fit the new digital age. These kinds of things might be interesting to you. This conference was just a couple of years ago. Might be interesting to you. I'll talk about that maybe during the Hangout tomorrow. But the thing I want to leave you on is this book, Inventing the Future, by Cernisek. I don't know how to say his name correctly. Cernisek and Williams. So they write this book, Inventing the Future, where they talk about sort of the post-work economy. And I link to a critical article that gives this nice little infographic. And where they summarize the point of the book into 4 main points, 4 demands for the future that embraces automation as a good thing. Because look, we have an economy structured where everyone needs to work because there was a time where there was a lot of work to do, especially when we're working in the farms. There's a lot of work to do, and it's timely work. You have to do it on schedule, and if your crops don't come in, then we all starve, right? So getting all that work done was necessary for the social system to function well. And in the industrial age, there was also a lot of work to do. The work becomes more specialized and repetitive, maybe, but there's a lot of work to do. In the early industrial age, we had to fight for labor rights, unions and so on, because early in the industrial age, there were no labor unions at all, and people would work 12, 16-hour days. This is what I want to show you. So this is an old comic from early labor unions arguing for 8-hour days. So it used to be that people would work for 10, 12-hour days, work on the weekends, and there was no structured weekends at all. The reason we have weekends, right, the reason we have 8-hour days is because early in the industrial age, the unions organized and they fought. They gave their life for 8-hour workdays and a 2-day weekend where people could rest and weren't being pushed to their absolute limits. Right? They fought to not be slaves of the industrial machine. Right? So this idea that we work for 8 hours a day, or you sleep for 8 hours a day, and then you have 8 hours for yourself, leisure time. Right? This is an invention of the industrial age to deal with the way that it changes the way that we work. Right? The very idea of leisure time, of personal leisure time, is something that was created in the industrial age as part of this organization of the structure of work. Right, so the 8 hours for yourself was supposed to be in contrast to the 8 hours you're doing at the job in the factory, right? Working for the man. So when Marx talks about industrialization, one of the terms he uses is alienation. That one of the things that industrialized capital does is it alienates us from our labor. So Marx thinks that working labor is something that's very human and very much part of the natural world. All animals have to work for a living, right? A spider has to weave its web, and ants have to build their colony, and so on. All animals have to do some work to survive, and humans also have to do some work to survive. But Marx says that the work that we do under industrial capitalism is different from the work we do in nature, because the work we do in nature is work where we see the direct connection between the labor that we do and the results, how it impacts our lives. Right? If I'm out there hunting, right, then later that day I'm eating the thing that I hunted, and so I see a direct connection between all the energy I put in and what I get as a result. Now, I put in energy and I get results from industrial capitalism also, but these are much more distantly removed. So if I'm working at a factory, building some widget for some part that gets sold somewhere else, I'm doing a lot of labor that really has nothing to do with what I take home at the end of the day. What I take home at the end of the day is a paycheck, right? So it's just the money, and I can use that money to buy things. But the things that I buy and the work that I do aren't very closely related. Right? This is the alienation of industrial capitalism, that my labor isn't connected with everything else that's going on in my life. Right? And so I feel alienated from my labor, I feel alienated from the social system that I'm working in, because it's not clear to me how my contributions fit into the whole framework. So one solution to this is to reorganize how we understand the structure of labor, and this is what Cernusek and Williams are doing in Inventing the Future. Right? They want to reconceptualize the nature of work so that we don't think it's absolutely necessary for everyone to do work. I mean, look, if robots can do all this work for us, then why are we requiring people go do the work? Why don't we let the robots do the work for us and let people do what they want? Yeah, so this is a quote from Buckminster Fuller. So he says, we should do away with the absolutely specious notion that everyone has to earn a living. It's a fact that 1 in 10,000 of us can make a technological breakthrough capable of supporting all the rest. The youth of today are absolutely right in recognizing that this nonsense of recognizing this nonsense of earning a living. We keep inventing jobs because of this false idea that everybody has to be employed at some kind of drudgery because, according to Malthusian Darwinian theory, he must justify his right to exist. So we have inspectors of inspectors and people making instruments for the inspectors to inspect inspectors. The true business of people should be to go back to school and think about whatever it was they were thinking about before someone came along and told them they had to earn a living. Why try to maintain an economic system that requires people to work for a living when there's things that all those people would much rather do? I actually enjoy teaching this class. I would probably be making educational videos like this, whether or not I taught this class. But it would be much nicer if I didn't have to do this for a living and if I could blow it off every once in a while if I wanted to. But I can't do that because I have to work for a living and pay rent and so on. But if the robots can do all these jobs for us, then maybe it's not necessary for us to do this work. So here are 4 demands from this Inventing the Future book for how to make this possible. So the first thing is to embrace full automation, to not fear automation. Automation is a good thing, and we should embrace automation as a political goal, work towards it, because it helps improve everyone's lives. All right, if automation can make our lives easier, if it can make us more, not just more productive, but also happier, healthier, have more time to spend with each other. Right? These are the kinds of things that can't be automated, the things that no one else can do but you. And the kinds of things no one else can do but you really have to do with your place in the social system. So no one else can be a son to my mom. Right? A robot is never going to replace that job. Right? That job is never going to be taken over by a robot because it's something that only I can do. Or be a friend to my friends. Right? Help my friend move. Maybe there's a moving robot that can help us lift heavy objects. But even if we're using that robot, you're still going to need a friend to help you move. Right? You're still going to need friends to talk to share things with. Those social relationships are really where the human value lies, the value of human labor lies. And one important thing to recognize is that this value isn't well reflected in our economic systems already. So one great example is the value of, say, a mother or a grandmother, or a house. The person, whoever maintains the house, a father who maintains the house. Housework is absolutely essential for the maintenance of the social system. Right? If people aren't maintaining the house, doing laundry and doing dishes and cooking meals, these and this is not just work for women, this is work for everyone, although it's traditionally gone to the women, and it's also been traditionally ignored by our economic systems, right? Mothers don't get paid for doing the work, especially of raising kids. Raising kids is probably the most important job in the society, and it's almost entirely not reflected in our economic system. You get a tax break for having a family, and that's about all the economic benefit that is accrued to those social systems, right? The value to a community of your grandmother, right? The wisdom that she has to share, that's the kind of thing that can't be automated, that can't be replaced, right? And that's wisdom that you'll have also, and you'll be able to contribute to the social system, especially as you grow older. Right? These are the things that are important. These are the things that people should be focusing their times on, their time on, the things that drive them, that they're passionate about, that hold the social system together. So how do we build an economy around these things? Well, getting robots to do all the hard work is one step. Another step is just to reduce the amount of work we're required to do from the get-go. So right now we have the 8-hour work day, the 40-hour work week. Right? This is something that we fought for in the early industrial age. Do we still need this? I mean, some people work a lot more than 40 hours a week. If you're a doctor or a lawyer, if you have to work 2 jobs, you're working more than 40 hours a week. Maybe the amount of time that we have that we're requiring people to work is just too much. I mean, people spend most of the time at work on Facebook anyway. So what if we just shrink the number of hours you work? Instead of working 40 hours a week, why don't we work 20 hours a week? Or 30 hours a week maybe? A 4-day week and a 3-day weekend. Right? Having each person do less work, but pay them the same and distribute the work around a little bit more. One big thing that gets talked about in this context is the universal basic income. This is the idea here is the idea is not to redistribute all the wealth, but is instead just to provide a minimum income that everybody earns by default. $20,000 a year, say, that everyone, regardless of whether you work or not, earns $20,000 a year. That's not the lap of luxury. You're not going to be living a luxurious life on $20,000 a year. And if you want to do anything more, maybe you get another job on top of that. Maybe if we give everyone a universal basic income, then the jobs themselves don't have to, aren't under as much pressure to give such high salaries because people have supplements to their income in various ways. And so we can, it's easier to sort of distribute the jobs around. So universal basic income, just give everyone $20,000 a year, let them do what they want with it, and make it so that they don't need to rely on these low-paying jobs, low-skilled jobs. And so that way it encourages us to automate everything, sort of accelerates the automation. Now, some people reject this idea of universal basic income and think that there's some value in making people work for a living, that if people, it's a puritanical work ethic kind of thing, where people need to be working for a living. If they're not contributing, then they're not, then they shouldn't be supported by the social system. So I think for just the basic issue of human rights, that we should be providing things like healthcare and education, food, clothing, shelter to everyone, that no one should be going hungry. I mean, we make enough food to feed everyone on the planet. We have enough resources to feed and clothe and shelter and educate and provide healthcare to everyone on the planet. We don't do this because our economic system isn't set up to distribute all those resources in the way that actually meets everyone's needs. Right? So in the West, we waste a lot of food. In other parts of the world, they go hungry. So a universal basic income is one way of redistributing the wealth so that it's more fairly distributed. Not so that everyone has the same amount of money, but just so that no one falls through the cracks. And we know from some studies that giving people money works. So they want to run more studies like this. We have only a few of these studies to go on so far, but for the last few years there have been some concerted efforts to study what happens when you just give people money. In the United States, we don't just give people money. There's a welfare system, but there's all sorts of hoops you have to jump through in order to be on welfare. In some states, you have to do drug testing. By the way, people on welfare do dramatically less drugs than people who are not on welfare. But even still, then the average population, if you drug test the average population, they do way more drugs than people on welfare. But still, there's this stigma. This is how capitalism works. There's this stigma around being poor, that if you're poor, then you did something wrong or there's something bad with you. So you're not supposed to reward people that are poor. This is the stigma of capitalism, that you fight against the poor people and you make everyone fight to be super rich. Not everyone can be rich, but if everyone's fighting against each other, then the rich can stay rich and the poor can stay poor. It turns out in the United States there's not very much social mobility. You tend to have the same economic status as your parents. That's not always the case. One thing that changes that is getting an education, and I know for a lot of students at NJIT, a lot of students are first generation college education, and this is the kind of thing that does change your economic status of you and your family. But for the most part in the United States, people tend to have the same economic status as their parents. The wealthy tend to inherit into their wealth. And so the stigma against being poor and this idea that we should refuse helping poor people is not very well supported. It turns out that when you just get, so in the United States, there's all these hoops around welfare, and we don't just give people money. They have their card, and you can only buy certain things with the card and not other things. There's all sorts of requirements for people on welfare. It turns out that you just give people money, no strings attached. They use it to do things that help the economy generally. So this was an experiment in Kenya. Kenya is one of the more well-developed countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But there are a lot of poor people in Kenya. There's a lot of need for infrastructural improvements. And so this program was giving people, I want to say it was $1,200 a month. I didn't see the number. Yeah, but this was no strings attached money. And they actually tracked them about how they were spending the money. And it turns out that they don't spend the money on alcohol and tobacco or gambling or things that you don't want people who are struggling to be spending money on. It turns out that even if you just give them money with no strings attached, they tend to spend the money on things like education, healthcare, better food, healthier food. Right? These are things that are hard to have access to when you're struggling with money. But if you give people money, they spend it on these things. They spend it wisely. Right? And so the suggestion here is that just give people money. They'll use it well. They won't just spend it frivolously. They'll use it to improve their own lives. And it'll make the transition to the future easier to handle. Now, one of the things this requires is getting over this puritanical work ethic that thinks that people need to work in order to be valuable to society. I hope the example of the grandmother or the mother or the person who's raising the child, the children, how these are very important jobs that people need to do for the social system to function, but that aren't valued in our economic system. So part of it's not just devaluing the work ethic, but sort of changing how we think about what counts as work and how work is valuable. Right? That if someone's not working, or if someone's working on their own project for long periods of time, sort of investing themselves in some personal project, that doesn't make them a bad person. And that we should build a social system that encourages these kinds of things. I guess there's Bill Watterson, the comic who did Calvin and Hobbes. Let me see if this is big enough. Yeah. I'll throw this in chat maybe. So it's a comic about an artist who draws for advertisements and sort of doesn't fit into the business culture and ends up resigning and drawing the pictures that he likes to draw and being a stay-at-home dad, and not making money, right? Not having the career that society might expect him to have, but nevertheless having the life that he wants to lead. So Watterson says, to invent your own life's meaning is not easy, but it's still allowed, and I think you'll be happier for the trouble. Right? And so part of the challenge here is to see how the rise of the machines, the entry of these robots into the workforce, can actually be something that helps humanity become more human, right, and do the things that really matter to us. That's a challenge, especially in our society that puts so much focus on being rich and successful in their career. And also, it's also a challenge in a technical school like NJIT, where so many of you are so career-oriented and focused. So I hope this lesson is taken in the constructive spirit that it's offered. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the discussion forums. I think that's everything I want to say today. Thanks a lot.